verse being cited here? Well, first it's objected that the Hebrew word alma does not mean virgin and should not be translated as virgin. That's one major objection. The second major objection is that it was a prophecy that had a context 700 years earlier that was a sign given to the godless king Ahaz in a specific situation and context. So how in the world could Matthew now apply it these hundreds of years later? It would be as if I'm preaching a message today and I'm giving reference to current events happening today, and I'm saying, let me give you a sign that God's about to move and pour out his Spirit, and I tell you about something happening in our day, and as it unfolds, you're going to see that God's really moving, and then 500 years later, someone pulls that up and tries to apply it to something in their day and takes my words as a sign that God's about to move in their day. You say, well, no, I was talking about my day. I was talking about my situation. And then the Hebrew says that she'll call his name Emmanuel, the mother, versus they'll call him Emmanuel. Plus, he was called Jesus, not Emmanuel. Now, of course, the last objection is a little bit laughable because you would have to think for a second if in the previous verse, immediately before you say, call his name Yeshua, that Matthew understood that his given name at birth was not actually Emmanuel. I would think Matthew got that and understood that. So here it's the symbolism of the name that's being pointed out, and often that's the issue, the symbolism of the name. But the question is, how in the world could Matthew quote this here? Now, I'm going to come back to that in a little while, because one of the principles I gave you yesterday is you must read the prophecy in its original historical context. And I want to go back in a moment and show you that Matthew was not just looking at Isaiah 7. This verse comes from Isaiah 7:14. He was actually looking at Isaiah 7 through 11, which is a major messianic section in the book of Isaiah. And that's why he quoted this. So I'm going to come back to that. Just put a question mark next to it for right now. So we read on, second chapter. This is about Yeshua's birth in Bethlehem. Verse 3, King Herod heard this, the report from the Magi. He was disturbed, all Jerusalem with him, when he had called together all the people's chief priests. This is the one, he's been born king of the Jews. What's this? Someone's going to compete with Herod? What's going on? When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel. According to Rabbi Singer, Matthew was terribly offended by that verse, the way it read in the Hebrew Bible, and changed it. Because if you go back to to Micah 5, where the verse occurs, let's take a look back there. Micah, the 5th chapter. Let's see what's written. Bibles that are thin enough to carry with you are hard to turn to pages. Micah 5:2, but you, Bethlehem, Ephratah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times, or some would argue from days of eternity. But I have no issue with the ancient times rendering here. So what's the point? Notice that Micah says, you're small among the clans of Judah. But Matthew says, you're by no means least among the rulers of Judah. So supposedly Matthew had a hard time with this verse, but wanted to cite it to prove that Jesus was supposed to be born in Bethlehem, but had to change it to make Bethlehem more important. Okay, aside from the fact that the New Testament authors have no problem with pointing to the obscure beginnings of the Messiah, right? He grows up in Nazareth, And it's even recorded in John 1 that when Nathanael hears about it, he says, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Nazareth? You got to be kidding me. And Matthew is one of those who quotes from key passages in Isaiah and certainly knows Isaiah 53 that says he's just going to grow up like a root out of dry ground. In other words, his origins and beginnings are no big deal, nothing special. In fact, he's born, according to Luke, in a stable. So this idea that Matthew was offended because it didn't make Bethlehem big enough here, you won't find any Matthew commentaries, serious commentaries dealing with it. Even serious rabbinic Jewish scholars dealing with Matthew's gospel, you won't find that objection. So what's the deal here? Why does Matthew say it? It's possible that his Hebrew text had, just with the change of one Hebrew letter, could read, you are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, as opposed to, you are least among the rulers of Judah. Some have speculated that, and we know there were variant texts that were being cited and used in those days, contrary to the rabbinic view that there's only been one perfectly preserved text. But his point is the same point as Micah was making. The overall point is exactly the same. Namely, that Bethlehem's whole reputation, that Bethlehem's whole significance is simply that this great king will come out of it. And this was ultimately where David hailed from. So the greater David comes from the same place. In other words, I hate to even belabor this. And this is one of these objections you think, whoever heard of it as an objection. Matthew is not trying to make Bethlehem bigger than it is by saying, hey, you're pretty big already, but now something even bigger is happening. Now, his whole point is the same as Micah. Your whole greatness lies in the fact that Messiah is going to come out of you, be born from you. Anyway, there are ancient rabbinic traditions that associate this verse with the Messiah. It was certainly where David's origins were from. It's very fitting that Messiah is born there. That's not a big battle. That's not a big deal. But we'll keep reading, because it gets supposedly really bad momentarily. Are you ready? So, verse 13, when they had gone, this is after angelic visitation and warning, the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph in a dream after the Magi have left. They had gone, and the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. There you have it. Matthew, diabolically, only quotes the second half of the verse to trick his readers. Now, you have to think, that he must have had a very short-term mission. In other words, get them to believe until they check their Bibles. Get them to believe with the hope that they don't know the verse in their head. Because this is not a prophecy of Jesus. Out of Egypt I called my son. He's quoting from Hosea 11:1. So let's go over there. And let's see what's written in Hosea 11:1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called Israel, the further they went from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burned incense to images, etc. It's not a prophecy of Jesus. This is not a prophecy at all.